There are so many different varieties of seedlings that I am excited to grow this year, but there are also 9 that myself and the Epic Gardening team are not, and that's what we're talking about in today's video. First up for me is the humble turnip. Now it's an easy plant to grow. There's a bunch of different varieties, Purple Top White Globe, Market Express. These are 2 classics if you love turnips. Hakurai is another one, but for me, I like radishes more than I like turnips. I like beets more than I like turnips. I just don't really like them that much, at least this year. What seems to be the case with me is I will find a plant and then I will say I don't like it. Eventually I will learn to love it by better cooking techniques, better growing techniques. So turnips probably will come back into the rotation, but for me, I'll do some different root crops this year.
Between my curly kale here, my red Russian kale, and my huge stand of lacinato kale, not even including this green chard right here, which is my absolute favorite, I have plenty of greens to eat. And all of these greens are ones that we actually like to use on a daily basis. So this year, I'm done growing all those alternative greens. And specifically, I'm going to point out that New Zealand spinach. Now, New Zealand spinach is really popular for gardeners because it's often recommended as something that could grow during the hotter times of the year where some of these other plants might struggle. But we found that it just really wasn't worth the effort. It takes a lot of work to peel off each individual leaf from the stems. It's a little bit tougher, and it's just honestly not that flavorful. The other thing that I found is that just in that corner right there, I have about 10 seedlings that have popped up of that New Zealand spinach, and I didn't even grow it there. So I just don't have any space for a plant that's going to self-spread throughout my entire garden when I have plenty of delicious greens to eat all year round. So no alternative greens for me this year.
The first seed that I'm not going to be growing this year is going to be controversial. I already know people are going to be upset when I say it, so just bear in mind that I have my reasons. The first one I'm not going to be growing this year is Cosmos. Now, I know that people love Cosmos, or you hate Cosmos. It's kind of a divisive flower because it reseeds and it spreads itself so readily that it actually kind of veers into potentially invasive categories. So in some parts of the US, it actually is considered an invasive plant. So whenever we're planting things like that, I like to keep an eye on it and see how it's spreading, if it's spreading outside of my field, if it's spreading to my neighbor's yards, because that is going to mean that it's probably something I'm going to cut if it's not a native plant. So Cosmos have been doing that because if you can't get to them and deadhead every one, if you've grown Cosmos, you know they reseed very readily and they will very quickly take over an area. Now, if it was a native plant, I would have no problem with it spreading outside of its bounds, but because it's not native to my area, I worry about it veering into invasive territory. The other reason has to do with the vase life of Cosmos. So the vase life of Cosmos actually isn't that great. It tends to be about 4 days at most, and we have to harvest it within a very specific window when the petals are still tightly curled up before they've started to open. If we wait for those Cosmos to open, they don't last that long in a vase, so it makes it very difficult for us to capture that harvest window at just the right time. It has an even shorter vase life than normal, only around 2 days, so it's great for event flowers like a bridal bouquet if you know that you can keep that bouquet in water and you only need it for 1 day. But for retail bouquets, it tends to not last as long as we like, so between those 2 reasons, I'm cutting Cosmos this year.
Sadly, a plant I'm putting a pause on this year, 2 plants, raspberries and blackberries. I used to have a beautiful berry trellis here with about 8 of each variety in the ground. And I think that might have been my problem. It's my first time growing raspberries in ground, and I think I overwatered the space and didn't prepare the soil and set them up correctly for success because the raspberries died, I tried another batch, those died, and the blackberries just kind of languished. So as summer's coming up, to me, it was time to cull this herd, go back to some smaller patio container varieties of raspberries and blackberries, of which there are many, and see what I can do for next year to improve my yield.
Next to me here is the bed where I successfully grew 20 different pepper plants, ranging from hot to sweet. But one thing that I won't be adding to the garden, at least I will not be starting any new seeds or buying any new plants of, are super hot peppers. Now these 2 pots here, you might recognize if you watched our Spicy Spooky AMA over on the Epic Homesteading channel, and they are ultra super hot peppers. That one over there is the Carolina Reaper, and this one here is a 7-pot Primo pepper. Now, as much as I like spicy food, I like hot sauces, I like spicy condiments, I always order on the hotter side when I go out to eat. I just haven't found a way to actually use these super hot peppers. Now I can take one of these that have, say, 1.3 million Scoville units and take a tiny slice and throw it into a dish to get some sort of seasoning. But why should I bother doing that when I could get a very flavorful habanero or a Scotch bonnet? I could use the whole pepper, get some of that fruity undertone and the spice without having to hurt myself in the process. So I am no longer growing any more of these super hots. I am going to keep these alive because I am a sucker and I can't just let a plant go. But no more super hot peppers for me moving forward.
So when we talked about the fact that I'm cutting cosmos, I mentioned the invasiveness category, and this next seed falls into that category as well. So the next one that we're cutting, and we actually have cut it now for a couple years, but I wanted to mention it, is called chocolate lace flower. So chocolate lace flower is actually in the same family as carrot, and it has a sort of lacy looking foliage and a purple umbrella shaped flower. And actually the flowers can go from white to purple to pink, depending on the plant. And even sometimes one plant will have all three colors. So when you first look at this plant, you think it's great for cut flowers because it has a pretty good vase life as long as you harvest it at the right time. And it also blooms really prolifically. The downside is it's the same plant as the invasive Queen Anne's lace. They've just bred it to be a different color. But we've observed it in our field exhibiting the same incredibly invasive tendencies. So there's so many flowers, like we mentioned, very floriferous. It makes a lot of seeds. And if you don't catch those plants and deadhead them regularly, which is a lot of work with a plant like Queen Anne's lace, then it drops seed everywhere. And then you're gonna end up with chocolate lace flower all over your yard. And remember, the problem with invasive plants is that they don't just spread to your own garden, they can spread for miles. So that is one that we are cutting. We've cut it for a couple years, but something to consider. And if you really want to grow it, just make sure you're keeping an eye on it.
Every gardener who starts off growing just vegetables eventually wants to try adding some fruit to their landscape. That's why I have 4 different blueberry plants. And I also have a guava behind me, a guava right there, a guava back there, and fruit trees all around. Now, one thing that became very tempting to me was when I saw the description for ground cherries. Now, I actually even went ahead, and by this point I have 3 different types of ground cherries. And when you read the description, it sounds really great. It's something you could grow in a container, and it provides you a fruit that is listed as being unusually flavorful and sweet. But that unusually flavorful description is the part that they're not really telling you. And that is that it has a kind of savory, almost umami-like flavor mixed in with that sweet flavor. Now, some people absolutely love it. Me personally, I hate it. The other thing about it is that the plant is very hard to support. It grows kind of wild like a tomatillo, so it requires a little bit of extra trellising, and it self-seeds like crazy. In a couple months, I'll probably end up with 20, 30 different ground cherry plants emerging from right here, which is where I previously grew it in a container. So for me, not doing it. It doesn't have the right flavor. I'm not growing ground cherries ever again.
So the last plant that I'm sadly not growing this year is a very beautiful one. And this seed initially really drew me in because of its unique beauty, and it is the Shirley Gray Poppy. So Shirley Gray Poppies kind of have this bicolor gray to this misty purple lavender color, and on the plant, they are very stunning. The downside is 0 vase life. They absolutely do not last in a vase, even with all of our poppy tricks. So normally with a poppy, when you cut it, you actually sear the end with a flame. So a lighter usually will take the end, will light a flame over that stem, and then it has a better vase life. As soon as we cut a Shirley Gray Poppy, we put it into a vase, we maybe get 1 day at best of vase life out of those poppies before all the petals just fall to the ground. Now, they do make a really interesting shape. So if you're looking for kind of an architectural detail, because the stems are somewhat wiry, they can be interesting in a container or a vase because of that shape, but it's just not enough for us to put the effort in, especially because poppies are a difficult one to start from seed, and they tend to be very finicky in my climate because we warm up quickly in the spring, and those plants just fizzle out pretty quickly anyway. So for that reason, we're cutting those Shirley Gray Poppies this year.
There's a crop that I might dabble with this year. I don't know if I can fully resist, but it certainly won't be a staple of the garden, and that would be garden wheat. In the years prior, I grew a winter wheat and a spring wheat, growing my first homemade from scratch sourdough bread on the Epic Homesteading channel. And then for the next batch of wheat, actually grew a homemade what I call focaccia, potato focaccia. Everything was homemade, one of the best things I've ever grown. So for that reason, I don't know that I can fully give it up, but what I will say is growing wheat at home is a labor of love. You can go to the store and buy it for a relatively cheap price, or you can go through the entire process, which you see here at home, and get not even that much, maybe a few pounds, maybe 10 pounds, but it is a very labor intensive process. So for the fun of it, it is amazing. But if you're thinking about being practical in a growing space, not so much. So these are our picks. Curious what you're not gonna grow this year, what you're deprioritizing. Let us know down in the comments. If you want some seeds, check out our seed company, Botanical Interest. And until next time, good luck in the garden and keep on growing.